Good morning. Welcome to another morning with Pajamas and Promises. I'm so glad you joined us today. I want to say that this week is the beginning of Lent. On Wednesday, we celebrated Ash Wednesday. And I do want to give a little plug for First Methodist Church this morning. If you do not have a home church, you do not know what you're missing there. I grew up in churches that were not as traditional, but at First Methodist Church, you have the opportunity to go to an amazing contemporary worship service with great music, but then you also have the opportunity to go to a true traditional worship service where they have a pipe organ and a chancel choir, and they do things like that. So we had an amazing Ash Wednesday service on Wednesday at lunch and Wednesday night. And so if you do not have a home church, I encourage you to go to columbusfirst.org, look up what they have, and visit sometime, no matter which type of service that you like. So this is the start of Lent going into Easter. So there's 40 days or about 40 days from Ash Wednesday to Easter, not counting Sundays. And I know sometimes the tradition is to give up something for Lent, whether it's food or fasting for Lent, giving up our sodas or our sugar or something like that. And that's a little bit difficult to do, but I would encourage you to find some reading to go along with the Lenten season. We're reading through the Old Testament right now. I read through the Bible with First Methodist Church, but I would encourage you to go and study that as well, because this time moving up to Easter is an amazing time and an amazing time of growth. So I hope you'll do that. So thank you for joining us this morning. I'm glad to be here with you. I hope you have your coffee in hand. I'm a little bit discombobulated this morning. My computer that I normally use that has everything on it just decided to die. And so I'm using an iPad this morning. So if I get a little bit off track, you'll have to just bear with me. But it is warm today. We don't need our fireplace and we do not need our blankets this morning. And so this reading takes us through a big stretch of Numbers, and tucked into this is a story that feels very simple on the surface, but I want to talk to you about how it can speak directly to the heart today. It's about leadership, about calling. It's about God confirming what He has chosen. It's about a stick, a dry, ordinary walking stick. So if you've been reading your Bible this week in Numbers, and let me go back up, it's Numbers 17 through 34, and then Psalm 45 through 51. That's what we've read this week up until now. So I want to just set the scene for you today. By the time we get to Numbers 17, the people of Israel have been questioning leadership. And we talked a little bit about that last week with Miriam and Aaron questioning Moses' leadership. But there's been murmuring, there's been confusion, there's been comparison. And so God decides to settle it in a way that nobody will forget. Isn't that just like God? He does things that way. So He tells Moses to gather a staff, a walking stick from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. So each tribal leader brings his staff. These aren't decorative. They're worn pieces of wood carried through the desert, leaned on during long days. So there's 12 tribes, 12 leaders, and 12 dry sticks. And God says, place them inside the tent of meeting overnight. So we've heard about the tent of meeting back when we were talking about the tabernacle in previous chapters. And so the staff belonging to the man, and God tells them to place them inside the tent of meeting overnight, and that the staff belonging to the man God chooses will sprout. Now think about that. They aren't planted, they're not watered, they're not placed in soil, they're just laid down overnight. So morning comes, Moses walks into the tent, the leaders gather, 11 staffs look exactly the same. dry, plain, unchanged. But then there's Aaron's staff, and it has leaves, blossoms, and almonds on it. So not just a little green shoot, full growth, buds, flowers, and fruit. So overnight, from something dead and dry. So can you imagine standing there holding your plain stick while Aaron's looks like it belongs in a spring centerpiece? I know we are starting to see the daffodils bloom a little bit. We're also seeing a lot of weeds growing up. And so he's standing there, and there's 11 dry sticks and one that's sprouting. And somebody probably thinks, well, that's different. So God didn't need a speech. He didn't need a debate. He let the blooming speak for itself. And so what does this mean for us? Aaron's staff was not better wood. It wasn't straighter. It wasn't more polished, but God chose it. I want you to think about that. Wasn't better, wasn't straighter, wasn't more polished or put together, but God chose it. And when God chooses, He brings life. The other 11 staffs were not worthless. They still had purpose. They still belonged. They just had different assignments. This wasn't about diminishing others. It was about confirming God's order. And we talked about that a little bit last week, how God has an order for things and we have a place in that order. This reminds me of a story that I read about a few years ago. In 2005, researchers in Israel planted an ancient seed that had been discovered during an archaeological dig near the Dead Sea. The seed had been sitting in a jar for about 2,000 years, dating back to the time of Jesus. It looked completely lifeless, dry, hard, ancient. For centuries, the type of tree it came from, the Judean date palm, had disappeared from the region. Most experts assumed the seed would never grow, but they planted it anyway. And weeks passed, and then something happened. A small green shoot pushed through the soil. That 2,000-year-old seed began to grow. They named the tree Methuselah, I guess after the oldest living man in the Bible. It kept growing taller and stronger. What had completely looked dead held life inside for the entire time. It had not expired. It hadn't lost its purpose. It was simply waiting for the right moment. So let me bring it back to what we talked about earlier. That seed did not suddenly become alive in 2005. Life was already inside it. It just needed the right season. Aaron's staff didn't suddenly gain power overnight. God brought life to what already belonged to him. There are seasons in life that feel steady and quiet, don't they? The routine looks the same. The responsibilities repeat. The days aren't dramatic. Sometimes it can feel like nothing is growing. I know that feeling. But God does some of his most beautiful work in unseen places. Let me repeat that again. God does some of his most beautiful work in unseen places. You may feel steady but unnoticed. We talked about that a little bit last week. Faithful. You may feel faithful but not flashy, not getting a lot of attention. You may feel like you're consistent but nobody's celebrating you. But that does not mean that nothing is growing. Sometimes growth happens quietly. Sometimes renewal happens overnight. Sometimes fruit appears when you least expect it. I think about a diet with that, or a change in eating habits, or an exercise program. You start on that thing and it seems like forever before you see any results. Then all of a sudden, one day you wake up and you're in a different dress size. Or one day you wake up and somebody else says, hey, I can tell you've lost weight. Or hey, I can tell you're getting in shape. It happens It doesn't always happen overnight, but it's not that it's not there, but it takes a little bit of time for it to show up. Let's talk about the Psalm connection real quick. Listen to this from Psalm 46, verse 10. We talked about this a couple of semesters ago. I love this verse. Psalm 46, verse 10. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. Stillness does not mean inactivity. It means trust. And from Psalm 51:10 in our reading, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Renew. That's what happened to the staff. That's what happened to the seed. Renewal. Life from what looked dry. I love that God didn't ask the staff to improve itself first. It didn't attend a leadership seminar or read a productivity book. It didn't reorganize its schedule. It stayed where it was placed, and God handled the blooming. There's comfort in that, because sometimes we think everything depends on our striving. Let me say that again. Sometimes we think everything depends on our striving, but God says, I can bring fruit. He says, I can bring fruit. And let me just tell you one more story. A few years ago, a woman in Connecticut stopped at a Goodwill store just to browse. She wasn't looking for anything important, just wandering the aisles like so many of us do when we have 10 minutes to spare and no specific plan. You know that feeling. You walk in thinking, I'm just going to look, and 45 minutes later, you're holding a mug or something that you're going to take with you and a throw pillow that you don't need that almost matches something at home. Well, this woman spotted a plain ceramic bowl on a shelf. Nothing fancy, just sitting there between mismatched plates and old casserole dishes, and it had a little price tag sticker on the bottom that read $4.99. So she liked the color, thought it might be nice for fruit, and she bought it. She took it home, set it on the counter, and used it just like any old ordinary bowl for months. Then one day she flipped it over and noticed a small marking on the bottom of it. And she got curious and did a little research and eventually brought it to an auction house just to ask about it. Turns out the bowl was a rare 15th century Chinese artifact. It sold at auction for over $700,000 from a thrift store shelf for $5. The expert said it had likely been sitting in someone's attic or kitchen for years, and it just looked ordinary, blended in with everything else. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed valuable, but it was. The bowl didn't change overnight. It didn't suddenly become valuable. It always was. It just needed the right moment for someone to recognize it. And that's what makes Aaron's staff story so powerful too. What looked like an ordinary stick turned out to carry life and purpose. And sometimes in life, we feel like that bowl sitting there on that shelf. Just ordinary, blending in, nothing special. But God sees value differently. He knows what He's placed inside of us. So you never know what's sitting quietly on a shelf or what God might cause to bloom when that time is just right. This week, if your season feels ordinary, if your days feel steady, if you feel like a dry stick on the table, remember this: God can bring leaves, God can bring blossoms, and God can bring fruit. He knows exactly where you are, and He is still the one who makes things bloom. He is still the one who makes things bloom. So what a great story to pull out of Numbers this week, and to remember that no matter where you are or where you've been or how much you look ordinary just like everybody else, God in His season can make that fruit bloom and blossom in your life, hang on. That's where, stay where you're, bloom where you're planted, stay where you are, and God will make something beautiful out of it. Would you pray with me today? Lord, thank you that life doesn't depend on our effort alone. Thank you that you bring renewal in quiet seasons. Help us trust your timing and stay faithful where you've placed us. Amen. I want to remind you that we are reading through the Bible with First Methodist Church. Also want to say that Miss Sue Gentry won an Amazon gift card last week, as well as Leslie Colson. So we appreciate y'all following us. Please like, share, subscribe to the channel. It helps us to get the word out, and we're so grateful for everyone who's watching and commenting and reposting. So thanks again for joining us today, and we hope you have a wonderful week, and see you next time.